From the food we eat, the air we breathe, the land we dwell, to the health of our body and mind and the well-being of all things in the universe. Unlock the science with Chula Radio Plus.
Welcome to Unlock the Science. I'm Lawanjira Suladet. In the Andaman Sea, on the west coast of southern Thailand, lies a group of islands called Surin Islands. The area is one of the healthiest shallow coral reef habitats and draws thousands of snorkeling tourists each year. In 2020, after end of tourist season, the Mokens sea nomads, who have long settled in the area, initiated a beach restoration project to safeguard their ancestral environment and also to find a way to survive. They set up a team to collect garbage, which was washed ashore by ocean currents, including those underwater. After sorting, they transport the garbage by boat to recycle on the coast, about 60 kilometers away. For their first year attempt, the Mokens of Surin Islands collected 4 tons of waste, half were plastic materials, which, if not collected, can break down and re-enter the ocean as microplastic. Another half were cheap ropes and fishing nets, which they often found tangled up around coral reefs. They want to continue their waste collecting and recycling project. However, funding is an issue as recycling money is not enough to cover salary and transportation. Mokens of Surin Islands are one of the 3 sea-nomadic tribes living in Thailand. For centuries, Mokens sailed across the Andaman Sea freely in large wooden boats, in which they also lived for most of the year. They only came ashore for shelters during storm and heavy rains. They lived off the sea and traded their sea cash for necessities, which are mainly rice and chili. Mokens sea nomads have their own language. They develop exceptional diving ability without using any special equipment. Their big boat, about 10 meters long, called Gabang, is dug out from huge log. Naturally, they acquire their own good sailing and navigating skills. As national borders became stricter, Mokens are obliged to settle down on shore. A small number have chosen Surin Islands in Thailand, which is the farthest south of Mergui Archipelago. Mergui Archipelago is off Myanmar coast. It is home to bigger groups of Mokens. In 1981, Surin Islands were declared a national park. National park regulations inevitably prevent Mokens from sea-nomadic way of living. They are, since then, not allowed to harvest the sea and gather from the forest. People are more aware of the Mokens' existence when they survived the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami unscattered, owing to their knowledge of the sea passed down by the elders. After the catastrophe, they are compelled to live in one small bay. As of 2021, there are about 80 families of more than 300 people in the village. They are crammed in a strip of bamboo huts lining the beach. Because of its spectacular shallow coral reefs, Surin Islands National Park accommodates tourists with lodging and snorkeling packages. Mokens living nearby are hired for manual labor as cleaners and gardeners. Some young men work as boatmen. Surin Islands National Park is open for visiting only 6 months a year and is closed during monsoon season. This means the Mokens will have no source of income for another half of a year. There are many proposals and projects trying to empower and sustain the Mokens so they can survive with their own capabilities. Ecotourism is one alternative. Today we have 2 distinguished guests to discuss the possibility of ecotourism in the Mokens community. First is Associate Professor Dr. Narumon Arunotai, Director of Social Research Institute, Chulalongkorn University. She ran the research unit on indigenous peoples and development alternatives. Dr. Narumon is a leading figure in the study of sea nomads in Thailand, particularly the Mokens of Surin Islands. At first, her focus was on anthropological study, But after seeing several problems faced by the Moken community, she also includes in her work the issues like nationality, cultural heritage, ecotourism, and development of youth guides and participatory community planning. Dr. Narumon is instrumental in liaison between the Moken community, agencies of the Thai government, and international organizations. Since 1997, Chulalongkorn University has been carrying out several field projects with support from UNESCO and other funding sources in recognizing Moken indigenous rights and implementing sustainable development projects with the involvement of the Mokens. Another special guest of ours today came far from China, but she is of Bengali Indian origin and grew up in Africa, Uttara Sarkar Crees. She is a veteran ecotourism and sustainable living planner, as well as tour operator and consultant. She has worked in Nepal, India, Malaysia, and Africa, and is currently based in Southwest China region. But because of the current COVID-19 pandemic, Uttara has been stranded in Bangkok. Since 2004, Uttara has been working in Gaotang, which is also called Shangri-La, in the northwest of Yunnan, China. Gaotang is known to possess the highest plant diversity in the northern hemisphere. It has been the playground of international botanists since the 19th century. We will be discussing with both Uttara and Narumon, first on Moken Zone project. The Moken people have initiated waste collection project. Narumon, with their circumstances, how can they make that project happening and rolling?
Actually, the Moken have been using their culture for protecting, using the area. So they have the ethic of conservation embedded in their life. So, for example, when I did my field work among the Moken, I don't see that we generate any garbage because things that they use in daily life are from the nature. But by and by, with the coming of modernization and tourism, then they adopt the consumption pattern of tourists and urban people who come to the island. So this is also the big issue with waste collection. I think we need to deal with the issue of waste production.
Is it possible to sustain them?
It can, because in the project, when they collect garbage, they have to sail or they have to take the boats out. And then the knowledge about ecological significance of the island is still there. They know which bay would be the area where the garbage was flown in by the tide and by the wind. Practically, they know the area very well. And like I mentioned elsewhere, that they have their own name, place names that call the bay, the beach, rocky area around the national park, much more than Thai names. So, when they refer to one area, the whole community knew what they meant.
Come to Uttara. So what's your advice in terms of when the community initiate their own project so that they can survive?
Well, I believe that it is always the indigenous people who are dependent on a resource for their livelihood. They will never overuse their resource, and they will protect it because otherwise they won't have food or won't be able to live. So I think they are the best guardians of the place.
And you think that the project that they create will be able to sustain them?
I think yes, but in this case, because some modernization has already come in, tourism has come in, a national park governance has come in, they will need help, and there could be cross-assistance among this group.
So what are they, the cross-assistance?
First of all, if the national park could see that the Moken people are part of the ecosystem, then there would be slightly different governance, and the rules could be made to accommodate them. And after that, there could be cross information. Like the national park could be helping the Moken people. The Moken people could be helping the national park. And same thing with tourism. It's the Moken people be helped to set a code of conduct, which the guests would have to follow. So that could stop the creation of more garbage.
What do you think, Narumon, if the national park has recognized and valued the knowledge of the Moken people?
I really agree, because actually the Moken community in ideology and the national park, they have the same goal of conservation. The Moken, like Uttara said, their way of life is really in line with nature. They create really little effect on natural resources. And it's in line with the park that would like to conserve natural resources. But then I think the national park neglect traditional knowledge and the value of conservation of the Moken. So the national park used the new method, whatever they learn, their way of seeing the area as different zones, like conservation zone, recreation zone, use zone, would be different than the Moken, who saw the zone as sacred zone, cemetery zone. But then if you translate all these zones division, it is for the purpose of conservation. So I think if we use the knowledge and experience from the Moken in order to increase the way of conservation, it will be good.
We will discuss about ecotourism after a short break.
You are listening to Unlock the Science on Chula Radio Plus.
What is ecotourism? Ecotourism is responsible travel to natural areas that conserve the environment, sustain the well-being of the local people, and involves interpretation and education, as defined by the International Ecotourism Society based in the United States. Uttara and her team with World Wildlife Fund China's successful panda conservation and ecotourism elements at Wanglang National Nature Reserve in Sichuan Province has become a pioneering project for giant panda conservation and ecotourism for financial and educational benefits for all stakeholders. I will continue my discussion on ecotourism for the Mokens with Uttara and Narumon. I will start with Uttara. So your ecotourism project has been used as a master plan in China. So what are the key elements in organizing an ecotourism project?
The most important is that there has to be an ecotourism asset. Ecotourism is more experiential travel where people learn and also where they experience a lifestyle and they learn from it. It's more immersive journeys. So most important is that there has to be an ecotourism asset. And in this case, it would be the Moken natural way of life. The second, in ecotourism, all the stakeholders have to understand and work with each other. In Sichuan, what we did was, once we narrowed down the stakeholders to those who would be directly affected, we devised a plan called Appreciative Participatory Planning and Action Plan. And we progressed on that basis, including the stakeholders, and how we could establish optimum land use for both parties, optimum land protection for both parties. Then the next question was, how can we meet livelihood targets of the people? We had to devise a plan so that plans were set on how the tribal people could earn a living on the periphery of the forest with the permission of the national park.
So what is the ecotourism assets in Yunnan?
So in Yunnan, in Shangri-La, the ecotourism assets are the mountains, the cultural life of the people, including festivals, the sacred sites for pilgrimage, and then the seasons and what the seasons bring, which is a huge amount of grassland flowers and mountain flowers, food items like mushrooms and walnuts and medicinal plants and herbs, and the scenery, the spectacular scenery, as well as the life of the different tribal groups, the Tibetan, the Nashi, the Lisu, and the Moso. In a nutshell.
I'll turn to Narumon. So you have started what you term creative tourism with the Moken at Surin Island. So what are they? Can it bring income or safeguard the ways of life?
Creative tourism have several definitions, but I think the core idea is interaction, learning from one another, having gained experiential with your senses, and then being inspired by one another. So it's not like one way tourists go to the Moken community, take picture, and then leave. It's more of a mutual activities and appreciation that they have on one another. So I think your question, whether creative tourism can bring income, definitely it can, and it can also bring more than income. It can bring more appreciation of cultural values, learning opportunity for tourists, but it also means that tourists should have like basic knowledge before they go. Tourists have to know code of conduct before they go into the community.
So what is the tourism assessment project that you did with the Moken so far?
Creating activities that the tourists can learn from the Moken, like some simple activity for the Moken, like rowing the boat, going into the forest and learning about ethnobotany, whatever they plants that they use for their house, for their boats, for their medicine, diving or doing snorkeling with the Moken, and learning about the resources or the fish that the Moken use in their daily life. And also craft making with the Moken, that they have pandanus mats made of pandanus strips. So some, simple pattern that the tourists can learn. That brings closeness between the tourists and the Moken people.
But before the COVID pandemic, we saw mass tourism coming to the Moken village, taking photos and selfies and very intrusive. Basically it's like a human zoo. So how can we change this?
I think many destinations in Thailand have been really popular. And mass tourism has seen as the way for economic growth. But during the pandemic, I think the government or even the Department of Tourism themselves learn more about how mass tourism can bring negative impact. And then they realize that, slow tourism or even secondary city tourism, indigenous tourism, ethnic tourism, community-based tourism might be beneficial to the community and to the whole country rather than mass tourism.
So Uttara, how can we avoid that kind of tourism?
I think, first of all, the asset has to be strong. In this case, for example, the tribal people living on the periphery of Wang Lang had to be allowed to live their life. And when ecotourism started, after the basis was prepared, then guests would accompany them and see and experience, but not be intrusive. And we had to set very strict codes of conduct for the staff, for the people, the tribal people, and for the guests. One of them, for example, is on arrival, every guest got a bag. And they had to give 100 renminbi deposit. So they had to keep all their personal garbage in that bag. And when on departure the bag was returned, their 100 renminbi would be returned. So kind of simple, practical activities could be introduced. And then there was true participation and respect for each other's culture, not just the Moken storytelling, but also the visitors telling stories about their lives in their countries for the Moken. And also specialist activities for botanists, for students, for young researchers, for nature walking, and for treks.
When we talk about ecotourism, it's a niche market, right? It can mean less money return. So how can we convince all stakeholders that is the way to go?
Niche market doesn't have to mean low return. Niche market can be high return.
Exactly.
Because several people would like to pay more to get the special experience. And I'll let Uttara expand on that. But I have another point that we never do accounting pros and cons or positive impact evaluation on tourism. We think that, okay, tourism bring income, that's it, that's what we need. But then we don't usually make the analysis on the negative impact on the environment, on the local communities, and on the local economy. If big tourism companies or chain hotels come in, and then local business might be at the disadvantage. We never did the accounting, but I think COVID and pandemic may make us rethink about that, and we might redirect our tourism development direction so that it benefits the whole country.
Uttara, so what your thought about ecotourism is a niche market?
Yes, it is a niche market, and I would like to say that post-pandemic, it will be more and more in demand by more guests who really want to experience a culture and do it in a non-crowded manner and enjoy pristine nature after being locked up for so long. And to continue on that is on the top end of high-end ecotourism is Bhutan. Bhutan charges $250 a day plus your hotel. And so that brings 2,000 people a year to Bhutan, and that's sufficient income for the hotels, for the country, for the people. So that's at the top end, but there are also other slightly lower high-end journeys where you can keep an entrance fee reasonably high, and a portion of that could go to the Moken and to the national park, so both would benefit. And then only the tour operators who will agree to bring their guests with the code of conduct, with a guide who's trained, would be allowed to bring journeys, which we did in Wanglang. And they had to, sign a letter of intent that they will do ecotourism as requested. One more thing that is very important, I feel, is that ecotourism is an additional income to their normal livelihood circle. So it doesn't impose on them. And then the income from the ecotourism part, there could be a mechanism set where it is equitably shared by the community. That way there will be no conflict in the future.
Narumon, you think that this is possible in terms of if we're going to set up with the Morgan and even like other ethnic tribe as well?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. And I agree with identifying assets. We usually see the way of life of community as really ordinary and nothing really interesting. But if we create a kind of storylines to help the people recognize how important the livelihood, even the kabang, the boat that has much traditional knowledge tied into that. The people will become more interested and see this as tourism asset. So I would like to stress that seeing the extraordinary out of the ordinary.
Ecotourism could become a new practice of tourism. We hope that the stakeholders, particularly the Thai government, will include the Moken people in any of the efforts to promote tourism in their neighborhood or to launch any development project in the area. Thank you, Uttara Sarkar Crees from Gaotang, China, and Associate Professor Narumon Arunotai, Director of Social Research Institute, Chulalongkorn University, for your thoughtful discussions. And thank you for listening. See you next Saturday.
Unlock the Science is edited and produced by Sinfa Tunsarawut with Lawan Jirasuradet as the program host and co-producer.